Thank you, Bob. So we're just going to roll right into our next session, and now we're going to hear and celebrate the PAN Award in Leadership. To introduce the award, I present John Hayworth. He is a board of directors for the American for the Arts and liaison to the PAN Council. And when we don't keep him busy, he's actually the director for the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. John?
Thank you so much, and I just want to do another shout out for Patricia and for Bob Lynch and everyone on the AFTA staff for everything they've done for our field. Everyone, a big round of applause for them. I have served on the AFTA board for many years, and I love this organization, and I've learned so much. But I'll tell you, serving as the board's liaison to the PAN Council is where I really learn the most, learn new things, see imagination and stories in play, and see communities transformed. And it's a huge honor for me, and I'm indebted to everybody for that. The PAN is a really big deal. This is an award that is grounded on peer recognition. It's an award that recognizes the work of all of us. It's a major honor for achievement of distinction. It represents the highest and the absolute best practices of the public art field. Our past awardees have included major artists of great distinction and public arts administrators. This year's awardee inspires all of us and celebrates the work that everyone in this room does. And I have the honor of introducing the presenter of that award, Renee Pachowski. And she told me a story this morning. I won't get into the details of that. But last night, she had a major dream about a colleague who got huge recognition. And I thought, what a perfect lead-in for this. Renee has served on the PAN Council, and in fact, her term ends this year, so she's leaving the council for now, but I know she's going to continue working with us. She was in a staff capacity working as the first PAN Council director. She is the person for public art in Pittsburgh and the region. She told me, asked her, what is the essence of your job? She said, it is to build capacity and systems for public art, and she does this everywhere she goes. She serves the field herself with distinction, with passion, with humor, and with great competence. And it's my honor to introduce her, and she will introduce this year's awardee. Thank you, Renee.
Okay, so the dream was that on my staff was Miss Pennsylvania. No pressure to get dressed every morning. So anyway, it gives me incredible pleasure to present the 2015 PAN Award to the Association for Public Art. They are the nation's first private nonprofit organization dedicated to integrating public art and urban planning. They were founded in 1872, and the association commissions, preserves, promotes, and interprets public art in Philadelphia. Despite their Philadelphia focus, this organization is a national and international leader in the field of public art. They have influenced the development of site-specific public art, the role that communities play in selecting artists, the importance of conservation and maintenance of works of art as a function of public art organizations, and the absolute need for creative educational programs and materials as a way to connect with local, national, and international communities. Since it's Throwback Thursday, I'd like to highlight some of their accomplishments since 1872. They They were the organization that established the Municipal Art Gallery, which was a forerunner to a little organization called the Philadelphia Museum of Art. They collaborated with urban planners and designers to create the Ben Franklin Parkway in 1929. So Patricia, very interesting to hear about your transportation meeting. We can thank Association for Public Art for paving the way to that. That was funny. And the establishment of 3 outdoor sculpture exhibitions in 1933, 1940, and 1949. Zip a little forward to present day influences that they've had on the field. They initiated Form and Function, inviting artists such as Martin Puryear, who created this, and Jody Pinto to create site-specific utilitarian and projects that were integral to community life. That was in 1980. Seminal projects such as this one by Fingerspan Bridge by Jody Pinto in 1987 were commissioned through this program. Which one of us has not shown one of these works in a slideshow on the history of public art? In 1982, they initiated the Outdoor Sculpture Conservation Program, the first of the United States. Would Save Outdoor Sculpture, which was founded in 1989, have existed without this precedent? I think important for us at this gathering, they organized Public Art America 1987, which was the first national conference to examine public art. Would we be here today at a PAN gathering if it wasn't for that tradition of getting us all together to network and drink and have fun? In 1998, they initiated New Landmarks, which was probably the subject of at least 5 sessions here at past PAN conferences. This innovative flipped the paradigm of how public art commissioned by starting with a call for communities to participate in the program, then followed by a call for artists where those communities participated in the selection process. This program also changed the way many of us think about communities, helping to reframe it as a group of people with a shared denominator beyond a zip code. What else do we have in common, and how do those communities get formed? And in 2010, they launched Museum Without Walls, which is one of the most successful and informative interpretive programs in our field. I certainly think, and the PAN Council voted for this, that the Association for Public Art really deserves to be recognized for 143 years of great work. Please join me in thanking current staff, consultant, and interns. We all know it takes a whole staff to do this. This is some of their past staff and interns since 1983. They will be embodied today by Penny Balkenbach, who's going to join us on the stage. But I also want to ask Laura and Hope, who are here, who are colleagues of Penny's, to stand up as Penny takes the stage, because they certainly have contributed greatly to Association for Public Art winning this award as well. So Penny, come get your star. Miss Pennsylvania, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So let me just get my technology working. Great. Well, first of all, I have so many thanks to make, and this doesn't count for my 23 minutes of talking to you, in my view. But on behalf of our village, really, that is the Association for Public Art, I really want to thank the PAN Council. I have served on the council for 2 terms, and I know what a great job they do. So this is especially a wonderful honor. Thank you so much. To the Americans for the Arts, our entire board, staff who couldn't come are so excited about this recognition. Thank you, Renee. We go back, way back. And one day I think I'll be handing you an award, and I'll hold it up as high. And I Patricia about what I might say to you today that would be something that really is unique to my organization that could frame the work that we've done over such a long time. I'm so honored to work for an organization that has so many precedents. And it seemed almost obvious that I should talk about this legacy that we have, this unique 140-plus year history. It's a living legacy. It's also my personal history. And it occurred to me that it's your history as well. And that's what I want to share with you. I think that knowing our public art history, however brief program or however long, really gives you clarity, it gives you credibility, it helps you find your collaborators, and it gives you a lot of clout. So if you don't have a long public art history, we're very happy to share ours with you today. And I want to introduce you to our collective founders, our heroes. Not as nostalgia. I want to be really careful not to get nostalgic about this, especially listening yesterday to some of the challenges that we face. However, I think that when I introduce you to our leaders, I think what I want to talk about is that their future is our present. And after listening yesterday to the idea about, the future of public art, I really wonder what they would think of us today. I wonder if they would think that we met their expectations. Okay. So, who were these civic-minded people who found what was then the Fairmount Park Art Association in 1872 that was uniquely related to art and planning? This was, interestingly, a citizens' movement. It was not a government program. And it's a distinction, really, that we hold to this day. We're actually a membership organization, so we have a lot of people and muscle behind us and a very kind of diverse audience that work. Henry Fox and Charles Howell, pictured here, when in their early 20s, I don't have a photograph of them when they were in their early 20s. I don't think photography was invented then. But and they were probably less bearded, but when they were in their 20s, they enticed a group of trustees from all walks of life. And at the time in the 19th century, they were immigrant, they were native-born, they were merchants, entrepreneurs, lawyers, the first director of the museum school, which now is the University of the Arts, and collectors as well. And they had this common belief that placing works of art in public spaces would enable people of all classes to share equally in a public trust. And these were the kind of words that they used. So it's pretty amazing when I think about, a lot of our initiatives today. So the title of this is Then and Now, and I have a lot of slides, and I'll, from here on in, try to talk really quickly so I can share some really interesting images with you. So, some 30 years later came my heroine, Ellen Phillips Samuel. She was a woman from a public-spirited philanthropic. She was active member in our organization, but she was not on the board because the board was male. So she had to join the Women's Committee. When she died in 1913, we became her beneficiary of her residuary estate, which is said to have been at the time just about the largest bequest municipal endeavor of its kind. Now, she left us with a couple of directives. I'll mention two of them because they're really extraordinary. One was that when she gave us the funds, she said that we couldn't spend the principal, we could only spend the interest. So guess what? I'm here today because this woman in 1907 said, I'm going to give you this money, but you can't spend it all. And so over the years, this fund has increased, and we're one of the few organizations of our type that actually has an endowment. So we raise funds for all of our special projects, but unlike many of you, I have to say, fortunately for us, we're not worried about how we're going to operate. And so this organization, at 140 years, it's going to be going for another 140 because of the way that we were set up. Secondly, she asked that the association, after she died in 1913, would put ads in newspapers around the world, no internet, to attract this wide range of artists who might be commissioned to create new work for Fairmount Park. And what amazing foresight to have the notion that you would like scan the creative ideas all over the world and then bring people to Philadelphia. And that actually created those 3 exhibitions that Renee referred to in 1933, 1940, and 1949. And the idea was to gather all of these artworks by invitation and really expose the community of Philadelphia and actually the national community to people working in the 3rd dimension. Now, few people know that the percent for art programs as we know them today in the United States were actually instigated by artists. And in 1957, there was a lawyer in Philadelphia by the name of Raymond Spicer. Interestingly, his father was a lawyer who represented Brancusi in all of those is this art stuff that Brancusi faced. But Ray Spicer inherited his father's curiosity, and he took on artist equity, which still exists, I think, in some form, as a pro bono client. And this is in the 50s. And at the end of his artist clients, he asked Lou Kahn, the architect Lou Kahn, to join him in a mission to try to create a percent for art idea in Philadelphia. And he asked Lou to join him to go visit a man by the name of Michael van Moosisker, who was a lawyer and a writer. And they invited Michael to have cocktails at the Philadelphia College of Art. And in his memoirs, Michael van Moosisker wrote, I had no idea why they wanted to see me for cocktails. Why would, these 2 people want to take me out for a drink? Wait, is this, I think, yes. Oh, so this is Michael van Moosisker. And he was then the chairman of Philadelphia's Redevelopment Authority. And Spicer and Kahn convinced him of the merits of setting aside funding for new development for fine arts. And in 1950, he was a writer. He made this sort of open call to the Conference of Editorial Writers who had convened in Philadelphia and had this manifesto that said, percent for art. And within a year, he actually created the legislation, well, actually it's a regulation for the Redevelopment Authority's percent. So it's an amazing story. But at the same time, the artist Benton Spruance, who was a printmaker and actually didn't necessarily stand to gain personally in any of all of this, president of Artist Equity, and he enlisted the help of a friend, Joseph Greenberg, who was a sculptor who did benefit in the end. And they approached a man by the name of Henry Sawyer, who was a lawyer and a city councilman and also a member of our board. And as you might imagine, all these guys knew one another. And this is my other hero, Henry Sawyer. And evidently, Henry Sawyer had for some time tried to introduce the percent legislation to city council, and he just couldn't get any traction on it. And finally, he decided that he was not going to be in public service any longer. He actually became a civil rights lawyer. And so when he finished his term, he went into the very last session of city council, and the council surprised him and passed this ordinance. And he told me that he always thought of it as his going away present. So can you imagine that, this legislation that governs probably more than half of the people in the room actually was a gift to Henry Sawyer. It's really a great lesson on how artists can get something to stick in city government. So my personal inspiration comes from Marcel Duchamp. I'm not sure how many of you know that he believed that the audience completes of art. We've all been talking about this, we think about this, but in the 50s, Duchamp gave this lecture called The Creative Act. He issued this very famous statement which said that the creative act is not performed by the artist alone. The spectator brings the work in contact with the external world and thus adds his own contribution to the creative act. And this came during the time that he had told everybody that he was no longer making art, but he was secretly creating this final work on the right called Le Temps Donné, which, when he died, he left a manuscript that basically gave the instructions for how to create that work, which in the end came to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. But it can only be viewed by, for lack of a better word, looking into a peephole, which creates this sense of intimate complicity and really does stand for this idea that were it not for the viewer, the artwork basically would not exist. And of course, I again want to thank our current APA staff, small in number, but really with incredible ability. Laura Griffith, where are you? There she is, who's been the assistant director for many, many years. We love working together. And Nora Sutherland, where are you, Nora? There. Nora is our newest staff person, and she's working in development for us because we're really greedy. All of our endowment isn't enough to do all the things that we want to do. So thank you for joining us. The other people who couldn't make it today are Susan Myers, who's our public art program manager, Caitlin Martin, who does our media and communications, who I think a lot of, Ashley Lipolis, assistant, and Ginger Osborne, our very long-term office manager. And as you saw, we have tons of interns who have over the years worked with us and who've gone on, as it turns out, to very important jobs, either within city government or in other places around the country. But before us, earlier still, the Philadelphia story begins with the artist William Rush. And he was called the father of American sculpture in his own lifetime, but because he made this transition from being a craftsman to sculptor. He began by carving ship's figures on the prows of boats, and then he ended up being the first American sculptor, to my knowledge, who was commissioned to do a work in a public space. And here he is, there is on the left his sculpture Water Nymph and Bittern, and on the right, interestingly, is his plan for Franklin Square. And so this whole idea that artists might be involved more than just the artwork, but really in designing public spaces, has this antecedent from 1824 when William Rush already did it. He had a concern for civic improvements. He worked on public monuments. He made these wonderful park plans. He collaborated with architects and engineers. Importantly, he was an artist who was really daring. And I think all of those anticipated future directions for our organization and laid the groundwork, I think, for our evolution and also for public art in general. So Rush's Water Nymph and Bittern was installed at the city's then geographic center. And it's viewed on the left. In 1809 was America's first decorative fountain built with public funds. At least I think it is until someone tells me otherwise. And here we have it, public art as a nexus for gathering. Is that placemaking? Probably. However, interestingly, another thing that dogs us a lot is that some people at the time evidently objected fiercely to the revealing and clinging drapery of the nymph that was on display in the city center. And it really was the linking of public art and controversy began way back then. It turned out that Rush's model was apparently a socially prominent woman, and she created a scandal when she posed nude. So later, on the right, Thomas Eakins painted Rush carving but he put on the right someone who he referred to as a knitting chaperone. It's intended to both restore Rush's and the model's reputations. So I have little jokes, not big ones. Community engagement, not a new idea, colleagues. Emmanuel Fremier's Joan of Arc was commissioned by the association in collaboration with the French community to celebrate their centennial in 1890. And this started our tradition of collaboration, working with the city, working with community groups. This dedication was conducted in French and in English. They commissioned special music for the event. And today, as we engage and re-engage in many different ways with communities, an example here is a rededication of a Nandi, which is a sacred bull from India, when the Indian community came together for this occasion. Well, I want to talk about funding a little bit. You've heard a little bit about ours, but following the assassination of President McKinley in 1901, our newspaper, the Enquirer, asked people to send in $1 bills, and they collected $50,000 to create this monument to McKinley. So it was called public subscription, and that was how it was paid. Sort of, they made it in a way. And also in Philadelphia, there's a monument to John Wanamaker, who was a mercantile guy, where school children donated $50,000 in pennies in 1901 to build this monument to John Wanamaker. And of course, the models have changed over the years. This on the right is Klaus Oldenburg's early design for what is now his famous clothespin. So it's your monument. Frederick Remington's 1908 cowboy, which is on the left, tucked into the landscape, I think is one of the earliest documented examples of site-specific sculpture, because we know the day that Remington came to Philadelphia to position a horse and rider right on that location so that it overlooked the river. And it also had a connection to local history, because his model was a man by the name of Charlie Trigo, who grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but who had become the manager of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. So Remington, who was very involved with, the West, brought Charlie Trigo in to be the model for that piece. But you can see the integration of the piece in the landscape is obviously something that I tried to achieve over time in many different ways. And that Martin Puryear's pavilion that Renee mentioned earlier really follows in that tradition. In that project, it was a 60-foot walkway that led across a natural and that created this beautiful observation platform, but it also put everybody among the treetops for a bird's eye view because of how it was sited at that particular location. So opportunities for women making large-scale sculptures were very limited in the 19th and 20th centuries, but the association commissioned Beatrice Fenton's Seaweed Girl Fountain in 1920, and that, of course, set the stage for other works by women, including Jodi Pinto's 1987 Fingerspan. And Albert Lessel's beloved Billy Goat, which was installed in 1919 in Rittenhouse Square, one of our 5 major squares, is as much a family landmark today as it was in 1919. And I think, when I think of it, really, that it's the pleasure of it that it defies race and class and even age. It's just there, and it's there for everybody. And we have one of our little taglines is art for everyone, anytime. And this is really an example of that idea for us. The lighting of Philadelphia City Hall in the 20s, on the left, set a precedent for this crazy project that we did called Open Air with Raphael Lozano Hemmer that was commissioned a couple of years ago. But when you see that something like it was done, in another century, when I talk about clout, this really helps. It helps in the case. Even though we want to seem like we're new and innovative, I'm telling you, if there's a precedent, use it. Because it just opens up doors and makes people think that they're part of something that's kind of the next step. Among the really great privileges that comes with working with an organization that's been around for so long is this continuity that we have, which often is, in a way, a vindication that we gain through our archival material and all of our firsthand accounts of the public art protagonists, which, in various forms exist today. The artists, their patrons, their time, their spaces, their ambitions. Today, we continue that imperative through our Museum Without Walls audio program that Renee also referred to. You're making my talk quicker and easier. And this is a multi-platform program that's available in every way, online, by mobile phone, with an app, and we're continually adding to it. Right now, there's 60 different audio programs for works of art in Philadelphia. And what's unique about these is that we use this model that we sort of invented that we call the authentic voice model, because when you listen to these audios, they're not like acoustic guides. Everybody you're listening to has an authentic relationship to the sculpture. It might be a curator, it might be a historian, but it might be the grandson of the man who raised the funds. Or it might be the great nephew of the artist who remembers playing in the studio and the like. In one case, great fountains, it's the guy who turns on the fountain every spring, talking about the mechanics and getting people behind the scene. So it's been immensely popular, and we plan to continue it forever. And signage and identifiers, what is this stuff and how was it done and who? They're all things that we think about. On the left is our seal from the 19th century that was affixed in bronze on all of the bronze sculptures. But today we continue that idea with, and have in recent years developed a unified signage program for the city's sculptures. We began this in 2008, and we just approach area by area as funding allows. But the signage is actually the armature for the Museum Without Walls program, because on the bottom of the sign is the number that you can call with a specific number to that audio. So it means that you don't need to have planned ahead and downloaded an app. With any phone that isn't even smart, you can call and dial the number and just press the number to hear that. The most wonderful comment that came from a third party about the program was that someone said, it's like walking into a really interesting conversation about the artwork, which is really great and is a testament to our producers, because these people were never in the same room. We hire NPR producers, and they're very clever, and they make it seem like you're standing right there with these folks. Master planning. Not new. The association played a major role in developing the early plans for Philadelphia's glorious Benjamin Franklin Parkway, which was this diagonal boulevard that connected our city hall with the museum and the park itself. It was designed by a French landscape architect by the name of Jacques Rebet, who was inspired by the Champs-Élysées, and you could definitely call this a master plan. But what I thought, looking back, of course, what I think is really interesting is that the plan itself is for public art, but it was flexible enough that over time it allowed us to place many different types of artworks in that landscape. So it was, in a way, a timeless landscape that was welcoming and accommodated new work, with the recent placement, well, not so recently a Henry Moore, but more recently a really beautiful work by Marc de Souveraud, and just last year an incredible work by Roxy Payne. But I think that's the best master plan. Doesn't lock you in. It really gives you a greater ability to look towards this future that we don't know and allow new ideas and new works of art to come into the mix. So we do a lot of programming where we try, and we learned that in the summers in the early 20s, there were these large-scale municipal dances. They were called the Parkway Dances, and they were held weekly in the summers. And people would come and dance to the police and fire bands. And reportedly, according to the newspaper accounts, there were between 3,000 and 25,000 people would attend at any given dance. So we kind of reimagined this idea, and when the water was turned on to the Swan Memorial Fountain, which is centrally located along our parkway, we held an evening of tango at the Swan Fountain on the right, where all these people came, novices, and we imitated the format that they used, which was instruction. So we recruited college tango groups, who knew, to come and be the teachers. And then there would be free dancing so that professionals could dance with non-professionals. And then there would be a contest which attracted really amazing dancers and with cash prizes, which is exactly what they did in the 20s. And so we had, I think, between 500 and 1,000 people who showed up just for this event. The interesting thing is that at the time, they were very highly regulated for decorum. There's a bit of a theme here about decorum in Philadelphia. But they were overseen by a woman by the name of Miss Marguerite Valls, or Walls. And she actually was Philadelphia's official dance censor. Because if you got, Ms. Walsh was there. If you shook too much, Ms. Walsh was there. And she later became Philadelphia's first policewoman. So perseverance, we have a couple of stories about that, and I think all of you need encouragement to stick through some of the lumps and bumps that you encounter when you're trying to do really good work, really new work. Isamu Noguchi proposed a bolt of lightning for Philadelphia in 1933 to our organization, and we finally executed it in 1984, some 60 years later. And he confessed to me that it never could have been built at the time. The technology simply didn't exist to create an asymmetrical sculpture of that scale. It's over 100 feet. So here we have the idea of a conceptual proposal ultimately turning into a reality. And for me, this underscores something that Nori was talking about yesterday, which is the importance of giving artists the opportunity to stretch, to explore, and sometimes even sit by and allow the times to catch up with the artist. And that really was what happened in this case. And another example of this kind of delayed satisfaction is another project ahead of its time, Sala Witt's 1981 proposal to us, which was part of our form and function project that Renee mentioned, was finally installed some 30 years after its conception. We did this with the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And this was Sal's design for a garden, which he, as was typical of his work, he left the instructions for it to be carried out. But everybody was so worried about the maintenance and the growing and everything else that we could not get any traction on this until recently, when attitudes had changed, and we were able to work with his widow, Carol, to execute this. It is the only public park design by Sala Witt that was ever executed. Okay, this is not a work of the Association for Public Art. However, I raised this story because it really was this whole idea of Rocky versus the guardians of good taste. The guardians of good taste were our art commission, because in the movie Rocky III, there was this statue of the fictional prize fighter Rocky Balboa with his arms raised up, and it's unveiled in the movie in the courtyard of the art museum. And in real life, Sylvester Stallone decided that, of course, the city and the museum would want this movie prop, and so he donated it to the city, thinking that it could remain at the top of the art museum steps in perpetuity. And this then created this ongoing debate. And it was interesting because it was a debate about, the people versus the art world. People felt that this idea of Rocky's ascent was sort of symbolic of Philadelphia, which, has a reputation of being a scrappy town where, someone who really works hard and is determined and hustles like Rocky, gets to be a cultural hero. So finally, after many years, in order to acknowledge not so much the sculpture, but this cultural moment, Rocky was relocated to a little site below the museum in 2006. And not too long after, he was yarn bombed. And if you can read what it says, his vest says, "Go see the art," which is referring to the museum behind. But I bring this up because I think, we're naive to think that these issues of the us versus them and the art world versus the people are not significant issues, because they are. But I think as we learn our history and as we find ways to communicate more with people, that bridge, at least I do see it in Philadelphia, it just gets more and more and more closed. And I don't see that anymore as being this sort of radical us versus them idea, because there's so many different ways that public art can happen. And Rocky himself has been through many transformations, including ballerina. In 1973, I was working at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and I did some very early, pretty major, large-scale site-specific works with artists. And this piece with Gene Davis on the left was called Franklin's Footpath, and it was at the time the largest painting in the world. It was larger than a football field, and it was in this very kind of strange interstitial place in front of the Philadelphia Museum of Art that was basically a parking lot. So through this work, we converted the parking lot to actually, defining the space that people never even thought of before. And over the years, it became a parking lot again. And last year, the city has been doing programming in that space, and we suggested that how much better would it be if an artist came back again and imagined how that space might be more exuberant through the artist. And actually, we recently learned that this was awarded a year in review, so you'll hear more about it later. But part of this magic carpet, which was the project we recently did, the artist's name is Candy Coated, and she has a reputation for using all sorts of candy-colored things in her work. But among the things that she created were these artist-designed sandboxes with this crazy pink sand that were just the most popular thing on the Parkway that summer. And it's an example of, something so simple that is made all the time, but with an artist's intervention becomes this incredible thing. And interestingly, BMW was a sponsor of the Parks programs. Okay, wrap up. And they have an art car project that they've been doing for years and years. There's Calder in 1975, he did the first one. And there's Candy Coated. They invited her to decals on a BMW Mini. So I'm going to go really fast now. But Oldenburg's Clothespin was a commission of our RDA. Nearby is a work called Government of the People. I bring this up because of this whole idea of politics and patronage and how it sometimes gets in the way of public art. Before the Lipschitz work was completed, because it began as a City Percent project, it was abandoned by our then mayor, who hated it. He called it a load of plaster, but he really called it, we think, some other loads of things. But he had also run on a no new taxes platform, so he pulled the funding. And Lipschitz died, left the molds in Italy, and our organization took over the project. But here's an editorial cartoon which sort of sets up this discussion, visual discussion of Lipschitz's piece, the clothespin, the mayor. And what really is just hysterical is that when his family, it's the greatest irony, when his family finally commissioned a memorial statue of him, they asked for and placed it in the shadow of Government of the People, which was the sculpture he despised. Just quickly, this whole idea of cultural equity and representation also is something that we, have a history of looking at. On the left are two young women visiting the All Wars Memorial to Colored Soldiers and Sailors in Philadelphia, circa 1930s. And on the right is recent work by Papon Osorio, which is called I Have a Story to Tell You, which stands for this whole idea of storytelling. We have a phrase we always use, which is that every sculpture has a story. In this case, those kids, that's their family members portrayed in glass permanently in this casita that Papon built in the community. So, he's really addressing this idea of shifting the narrative about who's commemorated and by whom. Our aforementioned All Wars Memorial to Colored Soldiers and Sailors was one of the early works in our conservation program. It was an incredible work by the German artist J. Otto Schweitzer, which you couldn't even see its beauty because of the condition of it. So thankfully, our conservation program really has done a lot to change attitudes about stewardship of public art. I think in Philadelphia and elsewhere that work needs to be cared for, it needs to be paid attention to if it's going to be a hallmark of the public landscape. And to reiterate other things yesterday by Nori, wherever you are, there is no such thing as a maintenance-free public art. People at the time didn't know about acid rain or pollution. So finally, this is the end. I think a lot about high-tech and low-tech because we utilize and exploit like every technological thing we can think of to reach audiences, but we're also really mindful of the low-tech resources of people working together to create, support, explain, promote public art. So we now have a team of public art ambassadors. They're usually young artists or interns or students, and they're attached to every one of our projects. And they bring public art in a way to their peers and to this new generation of supporters that we are going to need in the future. So I hope that through interesting story, I think, that only the Association for Public Art has, that you can see this then and now continuum and kind of put into context the amazing work that you do that is really part of this unbelievably important, very American. Thanks so much, and thank you for the award, and thanks to my colleagues. And also, there are other members of Philadelphia's public art community here from Mural Arts Program, the city's Percent Program, to acknowledge them, because together we make this whole big Philadelphia public art scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny, and congratulations again to the Association for Public Art, and congratulations for all the amazing work you've done and will be doing in the future. We're going to take a short break, and then hear from the PAN Year in Review jurors next. And while you take your break, please pick up a copy of the latest issue of Public Art Review. It's just outside in the foyer. A generous gift of the Forecast Public Art and Public Art Review. So thank Jack Becker, who's around. He's the executive director for both organizations. And we'll see you in a few minutes.